Call to order and pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Welcome to the Township of Hillsborough Planning Board meeting September 1st, 2016. This meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 of the Open Public Meeting Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975 Sunshine Law. Roll call, please, Brian.
Mr. Peason?
Here.
Mr. Julian?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Mr. Srirachi?
Here.
Ms. Beccarina?
Here.
Mr. Estag?
Here.
Mr. Wagner?
Here.
And Chairman Lapani?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, I realize there are a number of items on the agenda, maybe a time for a motion to adjourn. Now, there are under planning board business, there's an issue regarding a member of the board as well as an opening based on the action taken for vice chair, etc. I would suggest to the chair that the board make a motion to suspend the order of business to deal with Dr. Marouli's resignation and the concurrent issues that come with it.
Thank you, Councilor. Is there a motion to suspend to address the Dr. Marouli's resignation?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. Well, I'll start then by regretfully have to announce the resignation of Dr. Dan Marouli, which is seat number 5. He had a term expiring of December 31st of 2018. His letter is in your packet, and I will read it as part of the record. It says, it was addressed to the board and the mayor. Dear Frank, after 30 years in practice as an orthodontist in Hillsborough, I have chosen to retire. Regina and I will be moving out of state within a few weeks. I must therefore resign my position on the Planning Board and Board of Health. It has been a great privilege to serve our community, and thank you and the Township Committee for giving me the opportunity. Sincerely, Dan Marouli. I'd like to thank publicly the time that Dr. Dan Marouli has put into all the boards that he's worked with Hillsborough. And the guidance he's given me and the board over the years, and he will be missed. He also welcomes anybody down to Myrtle Beach to visit him on the golf course. So with that being said, now we have to replace this seat of vice chair, and I would recommend any nominations from the board for this seat.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make the nomination for Mr. Neil Julian to replace Dr. Dan Marouli as Vice Chair for seat number 5.
Awesome, thank you. Is there any other nominations?
I'll second that one.
Okay, second and taken. Okay, motion to close nominations?
So moved.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor to accept.
All in favor?
All in favor, Neil Julian as new
No,
vice chair.
All in favor, close nominations.
All in favor, close nominations, sorry. Say aye.
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 And now
Okay.
you have
Now we need roll call
roll call for Mr. Julian's
for
nomination.
Mr. Julian as vice chair.
You want me to?
Mr. Peason?
Yes.
Mr. Julian?
Happily, yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Srirachi?
Yes.
Ms. Beccarina?
Yes.
Mr. Estag?
Yes.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
And Chairman Lapani?
Yes.
Mr.
Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Township Committee Member Shedd is here to swear in the vice chair, which he will do, but now that we have Mr. Julian as the vice chair, there is now a vacancy in the position of secretary.
I get where you're going.
So therefore, there now is an opening for secretary.
So we will now offer or open the board to a nomination for secretary of the planning board.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the nomination for Ken Hestag as secretary, replacing Neil Julian.
Very good. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Motion to, any other nominations before we go? Seeing none?
Nominations be closed.
Nominations be closed?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Peason?
Yes.
Mr. Julian?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Srirachi?
Yes.
Ms. Beccarina?
Yes.
Mr. Hestag?
Yes.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
And Chairman Lapani?
Yes. Welcome. Congratulations, Neil.
Thank
and
you.
welcome.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I believe Mr. Burchett will be swearing both gentlemen in.
Okay.
Mr. Hestag, Mr. Julian, if you could please rise. Please raise your right hand. I state your name.
I, Neil Julian,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
that I will bear true faith
that I will bear true faith
and allegiance to the same,
and allegiance to the same,
and to the governments established in
and to the governments established in
the United States and in this state,
the United States and in this state,
under the authority of the people,
under the authority of the people,
and that I will faithfully,
and that I will faithfully,
impartially,
impartially,
and justly
and justly
perform all the duties of the office of
perform all the duties of the office of
Treasurer, Secretary, rather.
Secretary.
Vice Chairman.
You're not done.
Stand, you standing.
To the best of my ability,
To the best of my ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. And now we know who's treasurer if we ever need one.
Mr. Chairman, with that, a motion to return to the order of business is appropriate.
All right, motion to return to order of business?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, public, for putting up with that short order of business. So the first order of business will be, thank you, Greg, minutes dated June 9th, 2016, which is in your packet. We would-
Mr. Chairman, the eligible members are Mr. Wagner, Mr. Julian, yourself, Mr. Hestag, and Ms. Beckerina.
We have motion to approve those minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chairman?
Second?
Second. Okay. Roll call?
Mr. Peason,
Yes.
Mr. Julian,
Yes.
Mr. Hestag,
Yes.
Ms. Beckerina,
Yes.
and Chairman LaPlante.
Yes. Next would be the minutes dated July 7th, 2016, which would be in your
Eligible
packet.
members are Mr. Wagner, Deputy Mayor Sirachi, Mr. Peason, Mr. Julian, Mr. Conard, and Ms. Beckerina.
Roll call?
On the motion.
On the
moved,
motion,
Mr.
sorry. Do we have a second?
Second?
Okay, roll call?
Mr. Sirachi,
Yes.
Mr. Peason,
Yes.
Mr. Julian,
Yes.
Mr. Conard,
Yes.
and Ms. Beckerina.
Yes.
Okay. Last one will be the minutes dated July 14th, 2016, also in your packet.
All members present, Mr. Chairman, except for Mr. Conard and Mr. Hestag.
Okay, we have a motion?
So moved?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Peason,
Yes.
Mr. Julian,
Yes.
Mr. Sirachi,
Yes.
Mr. Wagner,
Yes.
Ms. Beckerina,
Yes.
and Chairman LaPlante.
Yes. Okay, takes care of those. Next order would be the resolution in your packet for Dr. Kumar Ramaswamy, 668 Route 206, File 16, PB04 SRV.
Eligible members, Mr. Chairman, are Mr. Julian, Mr. Wagner, the Deputy Mayor, Mr. Peason, Mr. Conard, and Ms. Beckerina.
We have a motion?
I'll move 16 PB04 SRV.
And second?
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner,
Yes.
Mr. Julian,
Yes.
Mr. Sirachi,
Yes.
Mr. Peason,
Yes.
Mr. Conard,
Yes.
and Ms. Beckerina.
Yes.
Thank you. Next order of business would be RETS, Rets Partners LLC, 2016 variances, 16 PB06 SRV. It's in your packet.
Same members who just voted on the last resolution, Mr. Chairman.
I will accept a motion.
Make a motion to move 16 PB06 SRV, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Peason.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Sirachi. Motion for roll call, please.
Mr. Julian,
Yes.
Mr. Wagner,
Yes.
Mr. Sirachi,
Yes.
Mr. Peason,
Yes.
Mr. Conard,
Yes.
Ms. Beckerina,
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then we have our last one of the day, RB Manufacturing LLC, file 16 PB09 MSR, also in your packet.
Same group.
Same group.
Chairman.
Do we have a motion?
Make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to move 16 PB09 MSR.
Thank you, Mr. Peason. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Sirachi. And roll call.
Mr. Julian?
Yes.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Sirachi?
Yes.
Mr. Peason?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Pecorino?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we have no special committee reports.
We have one extension.
And one abstention.
Chrismic.
Chrismic, yes. I'm sorry, we have an extension for Chrismic Associates, I apologize. It's in your packet to extend this file 14 PB 21 MSR, extension of time of decision through December 8th, 2016 as requested. We have a motion to approve.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Second?
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Peason?
Yes.
Mr. Julian?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Sirachi?
Yes.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Hestag?
Yes.
Ms. Pecorino?
Yes.
Chairman LaFawney?
Yes. So, again, to reiterate, apologize, no special committee reports. Is there any business from the floor that is not on today's agenda? This would be the time to bring it in front of the board. Not on today's agenda. Okay, seeing none, we will move on. Consideration of ordinances, which there are none. So our first hearing will be public hearing subdivision site plan application for Meadowbrook of Hillsborough, file 16 PB02 MJSR, block 163.05, lot 101.02, formerly known as block 163.05, lots 101, 102, 103, 104, and 105 on Amwell Road. Applicant seeking preliminary and final major subdivision approval, preliminary and final major site plan approval, relief from maximum tract area for single-family dwelling, C2 variance for site height, a hardship waiver for the tree preservation ordinance to subdivide lot 101.02, 17.166 acres into 46 lots. 44 lots for single-family detached homes, one multifamily lot, 2.49 acres, to construct 30 multifamily townhomes situated within 3 buildings, and one open space lot of 6.06 acres to contain the stormwater basin, and all improvements on the property in the new Amwell Redevelopment Plan Zoning District, formerly known as the ARW Zoning District. Revised plan submitted June 22 of 16. EC reviews of 425-16, 523-16, and 627 of 16 continued from July 14th. Counselor.
Before Mr. Linus makes his appearance, Mr. Chairman, we have received certifications from absent board members who have examined the record and are eligible to vote. They viewed the video recording of the July 14, 2016 meeting. That is Secretary Hestag and Mr. Connard.
Thank you, Counselor. Mr. Linus.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board. My name is Francis P. Linus, and I'm pleased to be representing K. Hovnanian tonight on the Meadowbrook project. Just by way of a brief update, this is our third public hearing. We began the public hearings on May 12th, and then we came back on July 14th. We pretty much completed all of our presentation, but for the traffic issues, traffic impact issues, and we have with us Gary Dean tonight. But we are bringing back the following witnesses for limited purposes of addressing and clarifying any open items or questions. We're going to bring back Ray Papa, who's our site engineer. He's going to show you the project area plan and the slight reconfiguration of the acreage of the lots. And then we have Richard Redding. I'm sure your board may recall that Richard Redding drafted and completed the community impact assessment statement, and he's here specifically to answer any question from the board and provide any clarifications that are necessary regarding revenue projections and average sales price of the units. And then we have David Fisher. David Fisher is a representative of KHOP Nanian, Vice President. He'll give the board an update of our contacts with the Board of Education regarding the bus stop location. So without further ado, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to briefly call Ray Papa back.
Okay.
Mr. Papa?
If he could use the microphone if he's going to be speaking over there, please. Okay, he was sworn in prior. Do we need to re-swear him in, or?
Mr. Papa, remind you, you're under oath. You were sworn in previously.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I've put a board up labeled Project Area Plan. It's marked A14. I previously divided the internal parcels using the center line of the road to depict the townhouse area. Township professionals thought that was confusing. To clarify things, I moved the line to the curb line to show the townhouse area. Now the areas will be 2.32 acres for the townhomes. The single-family lots remain the same at 6.0 acres. The right-of-way area is 2.37 acres. The remainder of the site is open space, 6+ acres.
Okay, with respect to those areas, they're now in compliance with the redevelopment plan,
Yes,
either the letter or the intent or the spirit of the redevelopment
I
plan?
believe so, yes.
Okay. No further questions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Papa, will the setbacks for the townhome still comply with the redevelopment plan?
Yes.
Okay, and just a comment, Mr. Chairman, as the board may recall, this was discussed at the last public hearing on July 14th with regard to the locations of the lot line for the townhouse. In an ideal world, I would prefer to see the lot lines entirely outside of the right-of-way along the curb line, but I do think this is a vast improvement from that which was previously proposed. I would just point out that I do believe that easements will still be required for that portion of the private right-of-way along the southerly side of the townhouse lot. Would you?
We'll provide that.
Okay. And just one question for Mr. Papa. Do you think that?
Could you speak into the microphone? I'm sorry, just for the...
Sure.
Thank you.
Do you think that easements will be necessary or recommended for the sidewalks and/or parking spaces that are contained within that private lot? I'm not sure if Mr. Fisher might be able to speak to that better.
It's a legal issue, and I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. I'm not either, that's why I asked the question.
All right, we have Mr. Fisher coming. He can answer that question.
Sure, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Papa from the board? Okay. Thank you, Counselor. Motion to the public for any questions on this testimony?
So moved.
Okay. Is there any questions from the public for this testimony only that was just given? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Redding? Right, Mr. Redding, you were previously sworn in these proceedings. You understand you're still under oath?
Yes, I do.
Okay, we're here for a limited purpose. You prepared the community impact statement. You went through that at the last hearing completely. Is that correct?
Actually, at the May hearing.
May hearing. Actually, time flies when you're having fun, right? I guess the May hearing.
Yes, sir.
All right. The board may have some questions regarding clarifications regarding revenue projections and average sale prices of the units. That's the notes that I have, so.
Do you have a spreadsheet available of how you arrived at those figures? Basically laying out exactly what's expected to be sold, for each lot?
I didn't prepare a spreadsheet, however, KHOP Nanian did prepare a market and absorption analysis that was the basis, excuse me, for the anticipated base price and sales prices that are reflected in the community impact statement on page 20. That's typical procedure for KHOP is to, prior to getting involved in a venture like this, to look at the market comps to establish what would be the likely sales prices before going further. In this case, and it's set forth on page 20 of the community impact statement, the single-family homes we're expected to have an average sales price of $534,444 with options, upgrades, and location that would come up to $580,400. The townhomes were expected to have an average or base price of $345,900, with options for locations. That would come up to a sales price of $364,900. Those expectations were based upon comps in the area, which included, for the single-family home, Country Classics in Hillsborough. Those units were selling from $716,000 to $971,000.
That would seem to be an unusual comp, considering the size of the lot we're talking about.
They're 18,000. The lots are larger. Summerfields in Franklin is nearly identical in terms of lot size and product, and those sales prices, which are current and ongoing, are $539,000,
That's for you saying
$900,000,
Franklin Township?
$614,000.
Franklin Township?
Correct.
Okay. Because I don't think our tax assessor would use comps in Franklin Township when she does her assessment here, so do we have something that's similar in Hillsborough?
Not brand new, currently for sale. The resale market is also examined. That include Heritage Greens, Cortland, Majestic Knolls, Parkside at Mountain View, Pike Run, Heritage Estates, and Woods Edge. Of those, all but one are located in Hillsborough. Sales prices there range from the very lowest of $423 as a start price up to $708. At the higher end, from $525, $525 up to $712,000. So the proposed units here seem to fit within the middle of the range, both of the resales and particularly of the new single-family homes.
I mean, the reason why I'm asking is because these are, obviously smaller than than usual lots, so they're kind of unique in that. So I kind of figured the projection would have been based on, anticipating which model would be sold on each lot, and then maybe on a basis off of that, maybe some options on there. So that's what I would have been expecting to see.
You're correct. Larger lot size would command a premium. If we move down and look around Montgomery, the smaller lot sizes in right behind the Tiger's Tail there, I'm trying to think of the name of it. Those units there, they're single-family homes on small lots starting in the $700,000 range, which means that it's a discount over the larger lots that you would find in Pike Run, which are a third-acre lots.
How large are those lots?
Which in Charbel?
That's the one behind Tiger's
Yeah,
Tail.
Charbels are clustered down to, I believe, around a quarter of an acre,
That's still,
10,000 feet.
yeah, these are at, at most, 70, it was in the sevens, was the larger ones. Most of them were under 6. So,
As the lot size goes down, it's not a proportionate reduction in the sales price because you still have the house that's located on it.
granted, but I'm just, again, getting anticipated what's going to be sold, which model. I'm assuming the smaller models will buy beyond most of those homes. So that's what's,
Yeah, most of the lots in Hillsborough tend to be larger than what is proposed here. But then again, most of the new single-family product in Hillsborough has a much higher entry price than what's being proposed.
And all of the lot sizes for the single-family homes are consistent with the redevelopment plan parameters, correct?
That's my understanding.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Mr. Fisher, who's anxiously waiting.
No, because they were good questions, and they're all things that we consider when we
Remind you,
initially.
Mr. Fisher, you're still under oath.
Yes, I am, thank you. When we evaluate properties to acquire and look at real estate opportunities like this, our best hope is to find new construction in the town or in the immediate area that compares to what we're proposing to develop. When that doesn't happen, we do look at resales. And the documentation that Mr. Redding refers to are market comp graphs that we do for each of these projects. And they're not just done based on a project-to-project comparison, but we have data behind each of these that then begins to look at the difference in hard options, selling options, premiums, tax rates, the difference in towns. So all those things are taken into consideration. On the initial graph, they're not. It's the raw data. And then we go further into the analysis of each of those comps to compare what we're proposing to other similar developments, taking then into consideration, even with a regression analysis, the differences in communities that we feel are either better or not as good as the one we're proposing to develop it, as well as tax rates and so forth. So we do feel comfortable with the projected average sales prices here. And, you know, I think that it's a valid range that we've developed and we're comfortable with it. But we understand the questions, and there isn't much like product like this, certainly in Hillsborough, but there is some in the area. And I think that we've put together a reasonable projection for average prices.
Okay. I mean, depending on how large your analysis is, I mean, would it be much to ask to have that added as an appendix?
An appendix to the community impact statement?
Yeah, just to support the statement that's in there.
I don't see why not. I want to check with the company just to make sure that it's not certain proprietary information on our information, but the rest of it is all just market comp, so I think it should be fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Councilor.
Public?
Any motion for anyone from the public for questions on the testimony they just heard? Seeing none? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. All right, Dave, you want to come up again, please? Within the last 5 minutes, you still understand you're under oath, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Just be careful the questions you answer from him.
All right, Dave, do you want to give the board and the public an update on contacts with the Board of Education regarding the bus stop?
Sure. As the board will recall, the last time we met, I had kind of explained what we had been able to discern from the school district in terms of proposed bus stop. And we weren't necessarily pleased with the result, but they told us that because we had private streets, they would prefer that the bus stop be located at the main intersection with Amwell Road, of the road between the two affordable buildings up front. After that meeting, I believe there was a meeting or a conversation at least between the township administrator and the school board, asking them to reconsider that and discuss with our company and RPM, the developer of the affordable homes, to come up with maybe language or specifications so that our snow removal contractors could perform in a way that would satisfy the school board that the streets would be adequately maintained during winter weather conditions. That message got back to us. We proposed language that we would put in our public offering statement and the declaration that goes along with our homeowners association documents, which would obligate, and some contractor specifications that would obligate our snow removal contractor to perform a certain way during snow events. As soon as there was up to 2 inches on the ground, they would begin to remove the snow, and certain timing things and other specifications. We sent that to Marcy Decker, who's the transportation supervisor at the school board. That then filtered over to her business administrator, and just day before yesterday, we received a copy of a proposal from the Board of Education on agreeing to certain requirements in consideration of allowing for internal bus pickup. We shared that immediately with RPM because we both have to be on the same page so that it works for both them and for us. We had another meeting as late as just late this morning to talk with RPM about that. I think there's some minor refinements that can be made to what's being proposed by the Board of Education. And I tried to get in contact with them today, and actually their business administrator called me back just this afternoon. And I think that with some minor tweaks, and he agreed, he said, feel free to tell the board that we spoke. that we can come up with some requirements that I believe both our company and RPM can adhere to that will satisfy the board that will do a proper job of maintaining the streets so that the school buses can access the development.
So if the board were to approve this application, you would accept the condition subject to the bus stop location, subject to the approval of the Board of Education?
Yes.
And
Mr. Chairman, just if I may, I just wanted to make sure that the Board of Education's draft letter made it into your packets. Do you all have a copy of the
I do not.
August 30th?
No, sir.
Nope. Some yes, some no. Okay. Let me just for the record, Mr. Fisher, as he said, he submitted certain information to the board related to how they would clean the streets. The letter that, or the proposed conditions that were sent back to Mr. Fisher, and there's basically three bullets that I'll read to you. One was, this was in addition to what Hovnanian had already proposed. They wanted confirmation or assurance that all roads are fully paved and no construction vehicles will prohibit our bus from being able to maneuver through the roadways. I take it that wouldn't be an issue?
No.
Okay. Second bullet was, the roads are properly salted the night before an impending storm. Did you discuss that with Mr. Mahmood this afternoon?
Yes, we did, and that's one that we may want to modify slightly. It's not normally a practice that you put down rock salt or liquid brine in every snow event the night before. Sometimes you do it just right before you plow. I even talked to the Township Public Works Department about that. So that's something I think we can work on and come to an agreement on.
Okay, and the last requirement was that snow removal begins no later than 5 a.m. Our buses are already on the road at 6 a.m.
I think we can agree to that one as well.
That was it.
For the record, as you have, we have it in our packet, but maybe show us where the proposed bus stop would be relocated from 206 into the facility.
They were not absolutely clear on where within the development, but I was surprised and this is Exhibit A9. It's the enlargement and rendering of the site plan. Initially, they were going to propose the bus stop out here at the main entrance. We suggested that it be on the first intersection once they enter the development. We weren't sure whether they would want more than one bus stop within the development. We assume not. But according to the business administrator, they may do at least one additional stop within the development. I have a feeling that they're going to come in, stop, loop around, and then go back out the same entrance and probably pick up at the back of the development.
Okay.
But he wasn't specific as to each
So it's obviously
stop.
far off Ammo Road, though?
Yes.
That was the point, okay.
So would that bus stop suffice for both projects, for Meadowbrook and RPM, or?
It requires RPM.
Yes, it would, and especially if it's at that first intersection, the location is literally on the edge of their property. So I think that's fine with RPM, and I've spoken to Brendan McBride from RPM about it. That's who we've been communicating with, along with one other gentleman from this firm, and they're okay with that location.
Mr. Fisher, if the Board of Ed determines that they want to run the bus through the entire development, will the geometry of the roads be analyzed to ensure that the school buses can get through there?
It's really a question more for our engineer in terms of turning radiuses. I know that he did a plan for emergency vehicles.
We did a plan and showed the fire chief that his fire trucks can make all these turns. The fire truck can make the turn, the school bus can make the turn.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, and Mr. Boconfuso had a question regarding easements, sidewalks. Are you prepared to?
Oh, yes, the question about easements within the parking areas. We can also accommodate that. That's, it's not an issue, and if we're going to place an easement along the private roadway for access, we can do it within the parking spaces as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, are you going to address the, I should back up, there was a request made that you supply a list of items that the homeowners association would be responsible for. Can you address that now?
Yes, we did submit just this week to the planning department a list of items that we feel would be covered by or maintained by the homeowners or condominium association as opposed to a public entity or utility company or the homeowner. And, when we develop communities, they're always maybe a little bit different. depending on the circumstances. Here, though, with private streets, there's probably more that this association will maintain than not. But we did provide, and I can distribute copies to the board, what we submitted.
Want to mark it? We got that.
You got that in your packet?
You do? Okay. So it was submitted this week. It's dated August 2016, and it outlines for the homeowners association, we'll create two associations because the townhouses are condominiums, so there'll be a condominium association, and we'll have a homeowners association. And then on the second page, it describes some shared expenses. But it essentially uses two categories and checks off those responsibilities of the association versus the water company or the Hillsborough MUA or other utility companies who want to maintain their facilities even though they're in a private street. And we've spoken to the MUA about that. They're fine as long as we create an easement within the roadways for the sewer mains. The MUA would prefer to control their sewer mains within the streets, and then the association or the homeowners for the single-family lots would be responsible for the laterals between the clean-out and their house.
All right, Dave, so what you've just been speaking about is entitled Homeowners and Condominium Association Responsibilities, Meadowbrook at Hillsborough, dated August 2016?
That's right.
And that's the document that you pre-filed with the board?
Yes.
All right, I'd like to mark that A15.
Mr. Fisher, I guess the short question is, other than perhaps in the instance of the MUA, are there any of these facilities that the township would be responsible for?
I don't believe so. The water company is the New Jersey American Water Company. The utility companies are on their own. So there really are not other public improvements that are part of this development that would be owned or maintained by the township.
Thank you.
Are there any questions on the board for this?
Quick one.
Any from the public on this?
I got
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I didn't hear you.
Just, I noticed under the condo association, there was a listing for sidewalks, and see a similar one for the homeowners. I assume there's.
Yeah, sidewalks, just like normal single-family lots, I think we require homeowners to maintain their sidewalks.
In front of their homes?
Yes, so that they would be responsible for, to shovel their driveway and their sidewalk like you would in a normal single-family detached community. With the townhouses, in a condominium form of ownership, we can't make them responsible to do that individually, so we would have the association do that.
Anyone else?
For the
Anyone?
homeowners, would that also include the detention area?
That's a good question.
Comment on that?
We will have certain, at least frontage improvements, especially landscaping, and that are not in front of a building lot. So those would be maintained by the association, and I think we have them listed as a shared expense.
Could it be in this A16 or whatever Mr. Lennis labeled that as?
Yeah, it might be on the.
It's on the back page,
The back
too.
It's on the back?
Common area
Yeah, shared
landscaping around
maintenance
ponds
features.
and open area
Very
spaces.
well, thank you.
Retaining walls,
Including the retaining walls.
Yes.
Right.
tot area play, snow, ice, and real street lighting. Any other questions from the board? No? Any questions from the public? Don't see any?
Okay,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Dave.
Thank you, Doc.
Gary Dean?
We need to swear him in, I believe, don't we?
Swearing testimony you give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Your credentials, please?
All right, Gary, would you give the board and members of the public the benefit of your educational and professional background, qualifications, and experience?
Certainly. I'm a graduate of Lehigh University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering. I'm a licensed professional engineer in New Jersey and have been qualified before this board on numerous occasions over the past 30 years, but also before roughly 300 to 350 different planning and zoning boards. as well as in Superior Court as a traffic engineering consultant.
And you still maintain your license, is
Yes,
that
I do.
correct?
We'll accept your qualifications. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Dean, did you and your firm prepare the traffic impact assessment for Meadowbrook proposed residential development dated February 2nd, 2016?
That's correct.
And that has been pre-submitted to the board and is part of the record in these proceedings?
Yes.
All right, would you briefly summarize your TIA?
Certainly. By way of background, this application represents the second phase of the ultimate development of not only the subject property, but also what's now known as the RPM tract. And our predecessor firm served as the traffic engineering consultant for the original developer of the RPM site in 2005. And so as part of that application, we've had the benefit now of, I think it's 11 years of traffic counts and experience of evaluating the conditions along Amwell Road relative to the development of this particular property. To accompany the application that's currently before you, as Mr. Linus indicated, we then, I'll say, supplemented that original work with a projection of the additional traffic associated with Meadowbrook. And rather than rely on what arguably might be antiquated traffic data, we took new traffic counts when we were retained about 11 months ago. We looked at the peak hour traffic conditions along Amwell Road and at Pleasant View Road, which is the intersection just to the west of the subject property. You can see it between the S and the B in Hillsborough on the Exhibit A9 that's been marked. And we also evaluated the traffic conditions at the Courtyard at Amwell driveway immediately east of the RPM tract during the same peak hours. And we did that just, again, to update and identify the current level of traffic activity on Amwell Road. We recognize that it is part of the Somerset County road system and is subject to review and approval by the county. I will say this is one of the more interesting land development applications in that no new driveways are proposed. The only means of access to this rear or northerly portion is through the central driveway through the RPM tract that bisects and goes in between the two buildings, as well as an interconnection to the adjacent Courtyard at Amwell property. I mention this only by way of interesting background, is that during the original RPM development application in 2005, there was actually a municipal master plan consideration to extend, and I'm going to point to A9, but to extend Merritt Drive, which is an existing street west of the subject property that ultimately would have continued through the neighboring tract, the subject property, and ultimately would have come out onto Amwell Road, precisely where the Courtyard driveway is. And I don't have the institutional background as to why that element was dropped. It obviously would have introduced potentially more traffic onto Amwell Road from the neighboring community, but it also would have given an alternate means of exit from the site to Marshall Road, out to Beekman, and to the other road system. But that was abandoned for whatever reason roughly a decade ago. So the access to this site has in essence been pre-approved or preordained by virtue of the RPM site plan approval and then obviously Courtyard. Our traffic study included a projection of the traffic from the single-family homes and townhouses. Unless there's a particular concern on those numbers, I won't bore you with all of the different traffic activity. But just to put it into perspective, it is about 55 total vehicle movements in the morning peak hour and 72 in the evening. So a little bit less and a little bit more than one car movement per minute throughout the peak hour. And by contrast, the traffic on Amwell Road ranges between roughly 1,400 and 1,800 vehicles per hour. So in terms of volume and comparison, it's certainly substantially less than is currently traveling on Amwell Road. As part of our study, we also evaluated what we call levels of service, and that is the relative ease by which a motorist can turn from Amwell Road in this case or onto during the peak hours. And the ultimate, what we call comparative test, evaluates the traffic. Once again, I'll refer to the exhibit that would leave the shared driveway on the RPM site and the courtyard site if this project were never built. So we take existing traffic, we then forecast additional movements that may occur on Amwell Road irrespective of the development of this site, and then evaluate how those two driveways would operate. And we look at it with and without the project, and that really gives us the best measure as to the impacts of a particular site. And under that, what we call no-build condition, which is we basically keep everything the way it is, and in 2 years hence, evaluate how those two intersections or driveways would operate. And in the morning, exiting the RPM site with just the RPM traffic, that would be level of service C. And levels of service are like a report card. A is the best, F is the worst. So we're falling in certainly an average condition, and those delays range between, I believe it's 15 and 25 seconds on average. And obviously someone turning left to go east toward Route 206 waits longer than someone who exits the site and then continues west down Pleasant View or continuing further west on Amwell Road. That's in the morning. In the afternoon, there's more traffic on Amwell Road, so people experience longer delays in finding a gap in traffic and making the turn. And under the no-build conditions, the site driveway for RPM would operate at level of service E, even if this project wasn't built, and the courtyard driveway would operate at level of service D. And I want to focus on that for 1 minute. We use delay, how long someone waits, as our measure of level of service. And that level of service E at courtyard under the no-build condition is 32.8 seconds. Certainly not an eternity, but if I were to ask you to wait 30 seconds, it seems like a reasonable amount of time. As we look at the future condition, the levels of service stay the same at the RPM driveway, even with more traffic. At courtyard, however, there is a change in projected level of service that goes from D, without the project, to E, with the project. Now that normally might raise some alarm bells as to, well, is that really a problem, or are people just waiting a little bit longer? I mention this because the threshold, the delay at which level of service changes between D and E is 35 seconds. So without the project, we're at 32.8. And with the project, that delay goes to 39 seconds. So a 6.2 second increase in delay. And because it crosses that threshold or that boundary between D and E, it technically shows the change in level of service, but from a practical perspective, it's not excessive delay or congestion or anything that as a traffic engineer suggests that there will be a problem in exiting that driveway. I should also point out that that occurs at night when most people are coming home. So it's not aggravated unduly by the project itself, but there is a change, and it is a very small increase in delay. So I do feel that that should be discussed, but otherwise it's certainly acceptable. And one thing I should mention is that when we did study the RPM site, we measured what we call gaps. That is the number of breaks in traffic on Amwell Road. And at the time we did that, there was actually more traffic on Amwell Road. We identified 72 gaps or breaks in traffic during the evening peak hour for which people would have enough time to successfully make a left-hand turn. We're only projecting 14 left turns coming out of that driveway and 18 out of RPM. So with the ability to accommodate at least 72 gaps, because we have a signal at Beekman, there's a signal at Raider, and those signals create some breaks on Amwell Road traffic. In my opinion, that driveway will continue to operate safely and efficiently, and that, yes, we're adding more traffic, but it's not of such a volume to unduly aggravate operations at either location. And the last element of my report just reviewed the internal circulation and parking for conformance with the residential site improvement standards. And in my opinion, all of the street widths and the number of both on-street and what I'll call off-street parking spaces for each unit fully comply with the residential site improvement standards. Full pedestrian accessibility is provided in the site. There are marked crosswalks and appropriate signs to direct motorists to stop at each intersection. And it's a fairly conventional layout in terms of site visibility and distances. So in my opinion, the layout conforms with the appropriate design standards, and again, will provide for safe and efficient traffic movement. That's all I have.
All right, Mr. Dean, did you have the opportunity to review the CME's report dated July 11, 2016, authored by Mr. Boconfuso?
Yes.
And more specifically, the items relating to traffic circulation and parking, and for reference, it starts at page 9, and it's item 10.
Yes.
I think you adequately addressed 10A, which was a summary of your findings and conclusions. Would you address 10B, the impact on the levels of service for the proposed development, or did you address that?
I covered that as well, with the delay.
Okay. And then finally, the nearby traffic signals?
And the gaps, and there was a minor, I'll say, error in that the nearest signal west of the site is at Beekman, not Marshall. That was just a momentary lapse.
Okay.
I know where the signal is. It's right there.
But there is a signal, and that's what you analyze.
Absolutely
It's at
correct.
Beekman, and you analyze it that way. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Dean, I heard your testimony relative to the, I believe it was the courtyard driveway and the transition from a level of service D to level of service E when comparing the no-build and build conditions. I believe you indicated that the delay time, excuse me, that the delay time would increase from 32.8 seconds to 39 seconds, was that correct? The level of service at the main access drive, I'll use for lack of a better term, the one that goes between the RPM development, is an E in both the no-build and build conditions. Do you have the delay times associated with those levels of service?
I do.
Because although they're both in E, there would be a slight increase.
Correct. And I'll do my best to find that. It would appear that that changes from 43.7 seconds under no build at a level of service E to 46.8 also at level of service E. So more delay simply because it carries more traffic. But again, that delay 3.1 seconds. So for the average motorist, as we sit there and wait for traffic, 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, that's the difference in delay. Not a minute or several car lengths of queuing. And when I say imperceptible, it's a technical measure, but I don't consider that to be significant.
Thank you. You indicated that you performed basically a field gap analysis of the traffic stream at the site. Is that
correct?
Now, for clarification and perhaps for the benefit of the board, could you please touch on that a little bit as far as what the gaps mean, whether it's both directions, one direction, how long, whether a gap qualifies as a gap and so forth.
It's a technical explanation for what we drive every day, and traffic is dynamic on the main street, in this case Amwell Road, as static traffic in a driveway waits to make a turn. And a gap is nothing more than a measurement of a break in traffic. To turn right, a motorist needs a gap or a break in only the westbound direction. And when it's metered, in this case, further to the east at Raider, and those breaks are created, that allows someone to turn right. When someone turns left from the driveway, that requires a break in both eastbound and westbound directions. And more importantly, it requires a break in the 2 lanes of Amwell Road in the westbound direction, and the eastbound direction generally in just the curb lane. We measured the 2-way gaps, the more conservative breaks in traffic that are necessary to accommodate left-turning movements. And that was the volume I shared of 72, where our exiting volumes at night, again, morning is very different, but at night, those left-turning volumes to head east back towards, say, 206 or Raider, I think it was 14 or 15 vehicles per hour. So we basically have a capacity of 72 and a demand of 15, roughly 20%, a little bit more.
When you have a question of reference to a gap, what time frame does that represent? Is that 5 seconds, or is that
good
13
question.
seconds?
It's approximately 7.1 seconds for someone to turn left.
Okay.
And what happens is, and again, we all do it without thinking about it too much, except for me, the second car behind you oftentimes will shadow the first vehicle, particularly if they can see clearly left and right, and that gap is a little bit shorter, sometimes 3.5 seconds. But that measurement we did of 72 gaps was 7.1 seconds or greater.
Okay, thank you.
Is there like a portion of time that, I would call like a stacking time where, most of the people in the development are going to be heading out, so there's 10, 15 cars. If you're at 45 seconds a car and I'm the 10th car, I have 5, 10 minutes to wait before I could even make a turn. And then my other question would be so what's the relevance of the level of service in terms of if you're in one sector away from being F, then what? I mean, is it something that you would go back to the developer and say it's a no-go, or you mitigate it somehow, or, so you know what I'm saying? Like, what's the relevance? I mean, I hear what you're saying, but again, I don't know if there's anything that could be done or not done. It's just information, right?
It's information. Delay is calculated and easy to measure. In other words, we can go out and look at cars and see how long they wait to make a turn. Level of service is this somewhat qualitative, descriptive term that I'll say traffic engineers and professionals have developed to kind of take what is a very technical gap and delay and kind of synthesize it into something that's maybe a little easier to digest. So to your point, is there a magic that occurs, a boundary that moving from E to F? Well, depends on which planning board I appear before. Some will say, absolutely, that's a rigid standard. We don't permit F. The real answer is it's engineering judgment. And if we got delays that showed 200 seconds of delay, that's over 3 minutes. That to me is a real congestion problem. But a delay that is 51 seconds, which is technically level of service F, versus 49.8 seconds, which is technically an E, I can't tell the difference. So
yeah, I mean,
it's a tool for guidance,
right,
but it's not a rigid criteria that E is okay and F breaks the camel's back. It just tells all of us as planners, maybe we need to drill down a little deeper to look and see whether this is a real problem or just a technical boundary.
I'm just thinking if I'm the 9th car, boy.
Well, no, that's a fair point. What'll happen is particularly for a residential community, if it's really bad at, say, 7:45 because of, say, the high school, anyone who lives there knows, I'm not going to leave at 7:45. I'll leave at 7:40 or 7:35, and they adapt very quickly. So a lot of sort of worst-case projections go into these analyses, and I should point out that the analysis we do, even though we call it the peak hour, we actually analyze it for the worst 15 minutes within that peak hour, and we essentially pretend or extrapolate that under the assumption that it's the same level of delay or level of service at 7:30 as it is at 8 o'clock. The reality is it's not, because traffic is spread out over that hour. So it's a planning tool, and it helps us evaluate it. But at least from what we've concluded, I'm not seeing anything that suggests that there will be 10 cars waiting to leave. The stack will be 2 to 3 vehicles.
I have a couple questions. One, in the trip generation graph you have here,
Yes.
how did you arrive at those numbers? For example, you have 44 single-family homes with an estimated number of 30 exits, and then you have 30 townhomes with an estimated exit of 11. So there's a pretty big discrepancy there on the ratio between the townhomes and the single-family homes.
Correct. The reason for that, and the way these projections are derived, over the past 40 years, consultants have collected traffic data at all kinds of land uses, and in this case, single-family home and townhouses are the most germane. All that data that's of actual communities all over the United States is sent to the International Professional Organization of Traffic Engineers called ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers. They're now in their 9th edition of publishing all of this data. And I'm trying to remember, I think there's over 200 or 300 studies alone of the traffic characteristics of single-family homes, and probably 150 of townhouses. So professionals like me, we go out, we put rubber strips across driveways, and we know how many units are in a community. We measure the ins and outs, and all this data is reduced and statistically evaluated. So based on 44 single-family homes, statistically, in a given peak hour, now the hour before is a little less, the hour after is a little less, but in the peak 60 minutes, we would expect 10 individuals to come home. Now you'd say, why are people coming home in the morning peak? Well, people drive their children to school, or they run out to get milk, or they're at the gym for whatever reason, or they're working night shifts. 30 people leave. So you can see out of 44 single-family homes, roughly 3/4, a little less, roughly are expected to leave within one peak hour. Somerset County, we see a little different dynamic. We know people are leaving as early as 6 or 6:30 to go to New York City or to Parsippany or to other parts of the state. And the peak hour is a little more spread out to a peak 2 hours, but we didn't want to temper that with anything other than standard book value ITE data. Townhouses, generally there's fewer residents per dwelling unit, and certainly not as many school children. So there's not as much traffic typically in a townhouse, and I was the traffic engineer for the Hills, and I spent 15 years studying the dynamics of single-family unit traffic characteristics in townhouses, and unquestionably there is a vast difference in the unit type. So there are, per unit, fewer people leaving in the peak hour for a townhouse. And again, both methods, if your engineer picked up the book and went to the chart and said 30 townhouses, we get the same number. But that's how that data is derived.
Okay, my second question, and I can't remember seeing it, is the driveway exiting the facility, is there a room for a right turn only lane? So therefore, if you're in the queue and you're making a right, you can get around all the people making lefts? I mean, I don't remember if there was room in there or not.
There isn't.
Okay.
And that's by design, and I'll share with you my sort of philosophy, and certainly the county has felt the same way. At a driveway or an intersection that doesn't have a signal, when there are two lanes exiting, and I understand, I wish I could get around the guy turning left. The problem is that right turn, as he goes to turn, and there's not a shoulder on Amwell Road, he can't see around the vehicle turning left. So he inches up a little bit. And then the person who wants to turn left can no longer see because the guy's blocking his view shed. So each one starts to creep out and it creates problems. So it's a convenience issue, but for safety, and I always hold that as a priority, the single lane is a safer design. Any other questions?
Mr. Dean, just one or two more questions, if I might. In analyzing the site-generated traffic volumes and how they're distributed to Amwell Road, I noticed that the vehicles leaving the site and seeking to travel eastbound on Amwell Road were distributed, it looks like they were distributed equally between both the courtyard at Amwell driveway and the main site driveway. Is there any particular reason that you, in analyzing the impact on the driveways, distributed those with a 50-50 distribution?
It's actually not quite 50-50. It is for the left turns, but you'll note anyone who wishes to go west on Amwell, that's 100% at the center, what I'll call the RPM driveway. In terms of guessing, predicting of the two driveways, who will choose to turn left from which location? Certainly, those individuals in the townhouse units on the eastern end of the site, if they wish to go east, the path of least resistance is to come through the courtyard. When we did our counts at the courtyard in the morning, there was zero traffic. So anyone who exits this community will quickly realize, let's say they leave at 7:30 in the morning, there's less competition, if you will, from the RPM as well as the other sites. If they filter their way out through the courtyard driveway, it's a best guess. And if it's 60-40, 50-50, we're not at a condition where one more vehicle disrupts the flow or the level of service, whether they choose the western driveway or the eastern driveway. I don't know of a better rationale. Traffic seeks its own level, and I think the residents who live here will quickly figure out which driveway makes the most sense for them at whatever time of day.
So you don't believe if the distribution was adjusted, it would have a significant impact on your level of service analysis?
Particularly in the evening where we had the level of service E, we're showing 9 vehicles, so that's one car every 6 minutes. I can't tell you, if one person moves to the other driveway, anyone will notice the difference. So no, it won't have an opinion or effect on that level of service. The volumes are simply too low.
Thank you. And the last question I have, we just received a letter, I'm not sure if you received it, from the Somerset County Planning Board. It was dated yesterday or today.
Yes. August 30th, addressed to the chairman.
Yes, and there was a comment in their report, the traffic requirements section, asking for an investigation of the operations at the shared driveway in an effort to provide a better level of service. It referenced the level of service E.
Correct.
I mean, it's really a county comment that you're going to have to address to their satisfaction, but do you have any idea of how you might go about satisfying their concerns?
I spoke to Kelly Major, the engineer to the planning board today, about the comment. The county agreed that level of service E is not a problem, it's not difficult. Their concern is that, is there anything that can be done to improve that level of service E? And ironically, the county's objective, much like DOT's, is to have as few driveways and intersections on their road system as possible. Fewer driveways, fewer conflicts, better mobility. The paradox is adding another driveway fully mitigates that level of service. So I can have a better level of service, but it somewhat runs contrary to the county's own desire, if you will, to limit access points. So it was raised because the county needs to raise issues. But beyond that, I did have that discussion. You're correct. We'll have to address it in writing, but our response will be, our mitigation is just that, and leave it to them to reject it.
Thank you.
Ken?
Yeah, hi. I have a couple of questions. One of them was that exact last question about that comment, to see what options were available. So it sounds like one of them you mentioned might be an extra driveway, but that might not be, that might have more negatives. So that leads me to the second question. The two exits that you have, the fact that they're somewhat close to each other, does that introduce any increase in risk?
They're,
because there's no light?
I don't know that I can characterize them as too close to one another.
People are exiting at the same time, or?
And I don't know what the scale, 50 feet. So we're easily 400 feet away, maybe more. Let me just do a quick count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 440 feet, roughly. And it's not like from me to that wall. It is a football field and then some in terms of distance. And you'll see that the middle driveway to RPM is just about the same distance to Pleasant View as it is to the courtyard. So there's nothing inherently difficult or challenging or unsafe about the spacing of those driveways. And they're both there, or will be. That's what I said. This project, the Meadowbrook project, does not change the two driveways that have been approved. And you know, there's not a third driveway to the west or something in between. We're using the infrastructure that was planned.
Right, so I guess if someone was coming out of the second on the right, is it the courtyard driveway?
Correct.
Yeah, and making a left turn, then maybe at the last second, if someone's making a left turn into the first driveway, that's still so far down the road that they would see that person before they began there?
Unquestionably, and just to put it into perspective, it's 40 miles an hour. To make the math easy, it's about 60 feet per second. And with 440 feet, it's roughly 7 to 8 seconds of, you know, decision-making time on the public street before that's an issue, not 1 or 2 seconds. So there's abundant visibility for both the person turning right out of the courtyard to see the person turning left out of RPM.
Okay.
And that, just to give you a sort of background, if this were a state highway, DOT allows successive driveways to be 24 feet apart. So we're 440. We're well beyond. I'm not saying I agree with DOT's minimum requirement, but at 440, we're very safe.
Okay, then just going back to the comments, right? The applicant's engineer would investigate options to provide a better level of service.
Yes.
So it sounds like you provided one that doesn't work. Are there any other options that could be considered or should be?
What creates the longer delay is the left turn movement. So artificially, the way to come up with a better level of service is to prohibit left turns, because the right turn movements will all operate at levels of service B and C. The problem with that is people want to go east. So if we displace that traffic by saying no left turn in the evening peak hour, where does that traffic go? Well, it goes east, it travels west, probably goes down Pleasant View.
Yeah, that's not viable.
And U-turns in somebody's driveway to go east. So it displaces the problem. It's a mitigation, but I don't recommend it.
So is there any way to make the road wider, the entrance?
Making it wider wouldn't affect the level of service.
Right.
It doesn't. In fact, one could argue with having more pavement to cross, it actually requires a longer time for somebody to turn left than under the current configuration.
I'm just going to throw this out here for fun. So all the way on the right, if that road all the way on the right came straight out and there was another driveway on that end, would that be too close to the middle one?
All the way over to the right.
On the left, rather?
Oh. let's just say for discussion purposes, there was a driveway that, even though it's on the neighboring property, aligned opposite Pleasant View?
No, not the neighboring property, but the regular road, if it came straight out on the left side. Yeah, yeah.
Merritt, yeah.
No, the road that you have.
This one?
Yeah, if
Right.
that came straight down.
Alongside the
No,
RP?
straight down, just extend it straight down, yeah.
Well, there's a building here, I don't know if you...
Oh, right, right.
Yeah, these are buildings, I'm sorry.
I'm
These are
sorry,
the approved
that's right.
buildings. So it either has to be on the far western edge.
Right.
And again, this goes back to knowing the county's comment, that original discussion about level of service, that was sort of the consequence of abandoning the through connection to Merritt. Because that would have given people a way to get out to, say, Beekman, Triangle, Auten, and all the other roads to head back east. So there's no other ways to interconnect.
All right, so around the building though, that wouldn't work?
Around the RPM
Yeah.
building? It would provide another access point. I don't think the county would approve it because it sits offset from Pleasant View.
Right.
It would require an amended approval for someone who's not here, which is RPM. And candidly, I don't think the county would approve it. Even
Right.
though it mitigates, I think they would say, you don't need a third point of access
Thank you.
for this use.
One more? Yeah.
Was there any consideration given to any safety concerns for the residents of RPM? I know there's some special needs, people that live there in terms of going from building to building, a pedestrian crossing or wheelchair crossing, as a thoroughfare going, in lieu of the traffic coming down that road. I mean, is there any safety concerns or consideration with that?
I don't know of anything specifically on the subject site. There's crosswalks. In terms of connectivity, I believe each building has its own refuse container, mailbox. I don't know what demand, if you will, or desire line there is for a resident on the west to go to the east unless they happen to be visiting a neighbor. If there's some additional treatment, we'll certainly work with your engineer to provide high visibility crosswalks and give greater awareness to the exiting traffic. However, I should say, anyone who's traveling south is decelerating because they need to stop right at Amwell Road. So you'll see clear sight lines, basically unobstructed visibility of pedestrians or any movement at that internal intersection.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just recommend a conversation with RPM because I remember the application and I remember some of the residents there, and I know they did have special needs in there, and I know there's wheelchairs going back and forth, so, I mean, that's my thought.
I'll defer to Mr. Fisher, but I certainly think that that's worth exploring.
I could say that we've had a number of meetings and conversations with RPM, principally about a shared access easement along their entrance, because our traffic will be using theirs, and they'll also be using our new roadway for potential emergency vehicles. So there's a mutual benefit to working with them on that, and our attorney and their attorney have been finalizing that cross easement document. They've never raised, the concern or the issue. It's not that there might not be, an attempt to cross that roadway with employees or residents, but it's not something they've brought up to us.
Anything else? Any questions from the public on this testimony?
Oh, I have a quick question.
Okay.
Obviously, mitigation would be to put a traffic signal there. Has that been, development is not, I don't think, big enough to...
Forgive me, I jumped way ahead of that. That seems like an obvious solution. The problem is traffic signals can't just be plopped down at every point you have a driveway with a lower level of service. And the reason is there are certain standards, they're called warrants, to determine whether a signal's needed. Unquestionably, for this use, because it's limited to one peak hour, we wouldn't get a light. And again, the county doesn't like them. One, they have to maintain them. And two, it disrupts all that east-west traffic with yet another light on Amwell. But I was remiss in not.
It was
fair
just
question.
an obvious mitigation. Second, we talked about left turns going out, but coming from the west going east, left turns going in. I know you may not have as much traffic turning in from the west in the evening hours, but do you have any comments or data on what the holdup on Amwell would be on cars turning left?
It's level of service B as in boy, and it's identical to the traffic turning down Pleasant View Road in terms of both level of service, and I'm pretty sure even the volume.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Public? Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you, Gary. That concludes our testimonial presentation. Just a matter of housekeeping, I'd like to introduce into evidence Exhibits A1 through A15, all the exhibits that we presented. And that concludes the applicant's presentation.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay. Anything, Counselor? Okay.
No other than if the public has any final comments they wish to make on the overall application.
Seeing none.
A motion to close public would be in order.
All right. Is there a motion to close public?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so we have a application in front of us that's been presented. Is any final thoughts, or David?
Just to review, there were 3 requests for relief, and I use the term relief. Keep in mind, this is a redevelopment plan. It's not, and you grant relief from a redevelopment plan as opposed to a variance. If Eric wants to call it a variance or not, I defer to you. But the redevelopment plan, the language in the redevelopment plan is specific that the planning board can grant relief to whatever. That being said, one would be to exceed the maximum permitted acreage dedicated to single family. You've heard testimony to that. One is to exceed the height of the sign pier, 7.5 feet versus 6 feet. You've heard testimony to that. They've also requested a tree preservation hardship so that it not exceed 1.5% of the project cost. The only condition I could think of, and Brian, if there's any, please add them, was that an appropriate arrangement be made with the Board of Education to grant access to the school buses.
The school buses, right.
Brian, were there any other conditions?
Yes, there was, I think that the applicant and their team generally agreed to comply with all the technical comments and discussion items in our report, with the one exception, as I recall, being we had a recommendation relative to open space improvements within, along the walking path within the townhome development, and I believe the testimony was that in an effort to maintain the privacy of the townhome residents, the applicant would prefer not to install such improvements. I would really leave it to the discretion of the board. I think that that's a fair position for the applicant to make, and I certainly would respect the privacy of the residents. There was also one specific item which we touched on at the last public hearing, was with regard to repair and restoration of the existing driveway in the courtyard at Marriott. I believe the applicant indicated that they would provide a note on the revised plans indicating that that driveway, any damage done to that driveway during construction would be repaired to the satisfaction of the township engineer. I would have no objection to considering that issue resolved if that note were added to the site plan. Obviously, as we sit here today, we really have no idea how much damage, if any, the construction activity is going to cause to that driveway. Beyond that, unless there was anything specific in our report that the applicant and their team has an issue with, I think that pretty much sums it up.
And again, just for the board's edification, the applicant has entered into a redevelopment agreement with the township, and it lays out very specific responsibilities in terms of what the applicant, Hovnanian, would be required to take up. That document has been finalized.
I have, in the document that you promoted, speaking of that roadway, the association responsibilities, obviously that you're sharing that driveway with the courtyard. Any repairs that need to be done as onto that driveway based on use over time, would that be shared amongst the two owners, the owners of the courtyard and the homeowners association?
I think we have two different concerns, and one is the first one raised by the board's engineer, which is to the extent that we damage
On
or
construction.
compromise that during
Right,
construction.
I'm talking about maintenance on the
will
roads
agree to it.
themselves.
Actually, the easement document, which was recorded May 11, 2005, obligates the courtyard to continue ongoing maintenance of their driveway beyond the completion of our project. So
it's their responsibility.
It is their responsibility. It was something they agreed to when the easement was signed.
Okay. It just wasn't anything here, so that's, for the record, that's theirs?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Linus, can you provide a copy of that easement to the planning department for our records?
Yes, we will.
Thank you.
Anything else, Brian or David? Is that all you
No,
have?
sir, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have, unless the board has any questions.
Just one last one. Eric, they will need a conservation easement, I believe, for the rear property. Conservation easement, you'll supply that?
That's correct, for the stream corridor buffer.
Thank you.
Do we have any discussion amongst, go ahead.
On that buffer, would signage be required for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I think it's required by the DEP as well, because it's coincidental with a riparian buffer from the flood hazard line.
Okay. Just going over, thanks to all the witnesses who came back again to clear up some clarifications, Mr. Linus and everyone. I appreciate the fact that you went back to the school board and took care of that concern that Mr. Wagner had and all of us about the school buses stopping on Amwell Road. And the fact that you're agreed to the professionals' recommendations and David's recommendations. I think that the project is good and clean. I don't know what the rest of the board is. I still have a little concern on the traffic coming in and out, as everybody does. Progress is progress. But that's just my thoughts. Anybody else?
I agree. I have the same concerns about the traffic, but, I mean, the county has commented on it, and I think, they're going to go back to them about the service level E, and, if they're, we asked the question about the light and whether that was necessary, and apparently the county doesn't believe it is, based on the people that are going to be there. So it's probably, if it's resolved with the county satisfactorily.
For the tree hardship, what was for the record, what was you're going to make a donation to the committee?
And based on our figures, it's about $188,000, if that's not correct, right?
Yeah, that's our estimate. We provided the planning department with a site improvement estimate.
Just to refresh the board. Okay. Any pleasure of the board here? What we want to do with this? I would make a motion to approve this application as with the stipulations provided, based on the assumption that all the board members, all the professionals' recommendations are met. Obviously, also about with the school bus, that would be something that would be very important. I don't know how we can make that a requirement, but I would try to make that at least a requirement that we have.
It will be a condition.
A condition, yes, I would think so. So with that, as long as that we've met, I would be willing to move this motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move Meadowbrook at Hillsborough, file 16 PB02MJSR with all conditions.
Thank you, Mr.
Second?
Second. Okay, we have a roll call.
Mr. Keithan?
Yes.
Mr. Julian?
Yes.
Mr. Conrad?
Yes.
Mr. Rachi?
Yes.
Ms. Pecorino?
Yes.
Mr. Hestag?
Yes.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
And
Yes. Thank you very much, Counselor.
Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Don't expect a resolution tomorrow, Frank.
We'll take a quick 5-minute break. We'll return at 9:10. We're back. It's 9:10. Our next application is Glengarry GGRE Company, file 15 PB04MR, Block 182, lots 10, 11, 12, 45, and 46, located at 95 Hamilton Road. Applicant is seeking minor subdivision with waivers to reconfigure lot lines by merging all 5 lots totaling 238.7 acres, then subdividing a lot in the southeasterly corner to create one lot consisting of approximately 25.494 acres, proposed lot 46, with the remaining lot, proposed lot 11, of approximately 213.25 acres of remaining land on the property in the M Mining Zoning District, EC review of 3/23/15. Revised plan submitted 7/28 of 16. This is a carried application from July 7th of 2016 without notice.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, before Mr. Marmora starts, we have a certification by absent board member, examination of record eligibility to vote. The indication is Mr. Julian has viewed the video recording of, I believe it should be July, wrong date.
Okay.
July 7th, 2016, therefore he is eligible to vote on the application.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, for the applicant, John Marmora. We were here before you, excuse me. The application, of course, has been kicking around for quite some time. We were last before you on April 7th, 2016. At that point, we were we went through the application at length and were asked to do 2 things. Number one, the board indicated it was uncomfortable with the length of frontage for the smaller lot on Hamilton. At that point, it was approximately 150 yards. 150 feet, rather, I'm sorry. And the other issue was they wanted to hear from our environmental consultants who had handled the remediation of the larger tract from the ISRA trigger. The ISRA trigger was in 2008 when Glengarry ceased operations, Industrial Site Recovery Act, and that's what triggered the remediation. We did submit revised plans, so it's slightly different from what you had just read, Mr. Chairman. We increased the smaller lot, lot 46, from 25.49 acres to 29.14 acres, an increase of 3.65 acres, and that was, of course, taken from the other parcel, so that decreased by that amount. But most significantly, I think, for the board's concern in terms of frontage, it increased from 150 feet to 596.43 feet. So we've increased it by nearly 450 feet. Mr. Maskey had asked me a question about whether or not it was physically possible to put a driveway at the far end, and Mr. Zetterbaum, our engineer, will address that, but there, in fact, is a driveway there. So that it certainly is possible to do that. To answer a couple of the questions raised in the reports, number one, no improvements are proposed at the present time. The township really has 2 levels of control over that. First of all, it has to change the zoning at some point to something it wants to see on this site. Right now, it remains in the mining zone, but no one, of course, is going to mine this property. It has already been fully mined. So the number one level of control is the township has to decide what they want to see there. Once the township implements a zoning ordinance amendment for that site, then, of course, a developer would come before this board for site plan approval for whatever is proposing. But we are not proposing any improvements at this time, and so it's strictly a minor subdivision without variances. The other point that Mr. Maskey made in his report was that if this were to be changed to industrial, we would meet all the bulk requirements for that as well. The question was raised about whether there were any deed restrictions, and the answer is there are none. There were none proposed. The site was cleaned up to what is called unrestricted standards, and our environmental consultants, as I said, who handled that are here this evening, Mr. Poston and Mr. Toscos, who will certainly willing to be sworn in and testify to that. But the short answer is that the township's hands have not been tied in any way by a deed restriction on the property relating to the level of remediation that was undertaken by Glengarry. It undertook a full remediation. Therefore, there are no restrictions on how the township might want to rezone the property. Another question was raised, I believe, in Mr. White's report about NJDEP permits for outfalls and temporary crossings in 2008. They were never constructed. The applicant, Glengarry at the time, decided not to go forward with that. So in answer to your question, Mr. White, no, there were no improvements there for that. So I think that answers the specific questions. What I would like to do then is have Mr. Zetterbaum, one other question, one other matter. The board also asked about whether, in terms of the increased frontage, whether it would meet requirements for traffic, safety, whatever. We don't have a traffic report because we don't have a use. So, for example, in your prior application, Mr. Dean went through peak hours, and since there's no use proposed, we're not able to do that. But Mr. Zetterbaum, in response to that question, did submit a supplemental report dated August 4th, 2016. I assume that was distributed?
Yeah, we have that.
Yeah, okay, so I don't have to mark that, that's part of the record? Okay, so that is part of the record. And Mr. Zetterbaum can walk you through that this evening as well. We've pre-marked 2 exhibits. They're actually the filed plans. I just had them marked so that it's clear on the record which sheet that Mr. Zetterbaum is referring to when he comes up to testify. Unless there are questions for me, then I would recall Mr. Zetterbaum, who at the April hearing did qualify as an expert in civil engineering and who was previously sworn and understands that he's continuing under oath.
Very good.
Okay. We need the mic.
Oh.
Just for the record, Mrs. Zetterbaum, indicate your name.
Robert Zetterbaum,
Spell your last name, please.
Zedderbaum.
Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Zetterbaum, you understand that you're under oath?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And at the last hearing, you explained the work you had done to prepare the original plan. Could you please explain what changes were made on the revised plan that was submitted in July?
Well, essentially what we did on proposed lot 46 is we moved the...
If I could, just for purposes of the record, you're referring to Exhibit A1?
That is correct.
Okay.
So we moved the westerly line of proposed lot 46 in a westerly direction. What we did is when we went out in the field to determine the optimum site distance that we could get for that property, we did notice that there was an area where there had been a driveway, obviously at one time, or at least access point to the property. It's flat, it's kind of bored out. Now at this point there's grass and some trees starting, but it was obviously a driveway. So we wanted to make sure that we incorporated that if anybody ever wanted to use this property sometime in the future. That gave us to that point of driveway, we wound up with a sight line of 459 feet. Now, going to my August 4th report, so I don't screw anything up, the sight distance for avoidance maneuver at 35 miles an hour, which is what this road is presently posted at, is 282.5 feet. For cars traveling in a westerly direction, and because of the downslope, that distance gets increased to 367.25. And for maximum effort for stopping sight distance in wet conditions, it's further increased up to 390 feet. We've got 459 feet, so looking at any of those distances out of the books, we've got more than sufficient site distance available. And as I said, with the existing driveway at that point, it somewhat made my work a little bit easier because obviously somebody had used the point in the past that had been safe.
Thank you. And the larger tract, could you just go through the dimensions? I guess that would be on A2, or no, still referring to A1?
Right. What that did is by increasing the size of Lot 46, that decreased proposed Lot 11 to 209.595 acres.
Okay. And would you explain to the board Exhibit A2?
Essentially, A2 is the same...
One second.
The color board is not...
Yeah, that's not us.
That's not your exhibit, that's why I'm... The only reason I'm suggesting is you might then want to move the other exhibit over. Or confuse our videographer as to what we now have a developed site when we're claiming we don't have one.
What we did on Exhibit A2 is we took the new lot lines and put it onto the overall topographic map of the property to essentially show where we have proposed our property line, and more importantly, we did show the location of that existing driveway to prove essentially that we did have a good access point to the property in question.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have nothing further from Mr. Zetterbaum.
Okay. Any questions from the board? I have one question, just as a point of, with these two new lines that you have here and the wetlands that are going through the Royce Brook, what, if any, does it affect the buildable use of those properties? I mean,
essentially, it doesn't. When you look at the wetlands on the property and the riparian buffers that would go along with the stream, there's really no effect by moving the lot line. Lot number 11, the roughly 2,000 acre parcel would be developed essentially the same whether we move that lot line or not.
What's the distance off the riparian zone?
It really depends upon the instance of the how that zone is prepared, if you will, on the riparian zone, but it can be anywhere from 50 foot to 300 foot.
So, I mean, you need a restriction if you're going to do anything, or an LOI or something. But I mean, we're not, I don't know if we're talking about that tonight.
we're just asking for a line on the map.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, that would all really be part of site plan approval in the
approvals,
future.
exactly. I was going to ask for if there's any questions from the public, but I see no public.
I make the motion anyway.
Okay. Is there a motion to open to public?
So moved.
All in favor?
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, well now, any questions for this witness from the public? Seeing none, we will move on. You're next, do you have any other witnesses?
Thank you. I'll call Mr. Poston. We also have Mr. Toscas. I guess Mr. Poston can, the two work together on it, but.
Just
Steve Poston.
State your name, spell your last name, and.
P-O-S-T-E-N.
Okay.
And also, why doesn't Mr. Toscas introduce himself?
Theodoros Toscas, T-O-S-K-O-S.
Okay.
Spell your first name for the record, sir.
T-H-E-O-D-O-R-O-S.
Since I won't believe either witness has been previously sworn, up to you.
You both swear that the testimony you give tonight is true, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do.
Okay. Mr. Poston, your credentials for the board, please.
I'm the senior.
Have a seat. And he can use the other mic.
Because you're blocking the view of the only important person in the room, which is our videographer.
You can use the other mic. Okay.
So I'm the senior LSRP within our firm. Ted is actually the LSRP for this project.
Okay.
So, typically, these guys will bounce ideas off of me and we'll
What's the name
consult.
of the firm?
AMEC Foster Wheeler.
Can you indicate, I think both gentlemen your qualifications.
Right, so I have a master's degree in water resources from Rutgers University, a bachelor's in environmental science from Ramapo College, 40 years in this business. I was the co-founder and past president of the Licensed Site Remediation Professional Association, currently on the board of trustees for that organization.
I'm Ted Doskos. I'm an LSRP. I have about 30 years experience in environmental consulting. I have a Bachelor's of Science and a Master of Science in Geology. I completed my Master of Science at Rutgers in New Brunswick. I am a member of various professional associations, and I've been an LSRP since the license has been first offered.
We'll accept
For the
those
purpose of
copies.
the record, gentlemen, could you indicate approximately how many boards or environmental commissions you've appeared before in New Jersey prior to tonight? Approximately, we won't hold the number.
Several dozen.
I have never testified before.
I assume you're offering both of these gentlemen up, Mr.
As licensed site remediation professionals, experts in environmental remediation in New Jersey.
Up to the board. Accept their credentials and qualify them.
We'll accept their credentials.
Thank you. Mr. Poston, then, would you explain to the board what your relationship has been to this particular property?
Right, so as I mentioned, Ted is the project manager of the LSRP for the site, so Ted has really been involved with the minutia of the project. I've been involved periodically in terms of trying to respond to some of the issues related to exactly how documents should be filed and the appropriate way to file some of the documents, and actually had some conversations with the management at DEP relative, to this specific project in terms of the filing of the documentation. So again, Ted has really been involved in the day-to-day work and the investigation and the writing of the reports, and I've been involved, periodically as, various questions have come up with the filing of the documents.
Okay, and the final report was filed by Mr. Taskas? Okay, Mr. Taskas, would you explain when that report was filed and what you did leading up to that?
The document, I don't have the exact date that the document was filed. It was, I believe it was, actually I have the document in my briefcase. I can look it up. The document was filed in, the remedial investigation report was filed in November 2014. It was part of a submittal that also included the RAO, which is a letter presented by the LSRP certifying the fact that the work has been completed and it's in accordance with the requirements as presented in the appropriate NJDEP rules and regulations.
Okay, and I represented to the board that it was clean, the property was remediated to unrestricted standards, meaning this township now has the ability to zone this property for whatever it wants because there's no deed restrictions limiting, for example, restricting it against residential use or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I would open my consultants to questions from the board because I think it was really the board that asked for them to be here.
You have anything?
Absolutely. Sure. As far as you filed the report in 2014, have you heard back from DEP? Have they accepted it?
As a matter of procedure, the DEP does not respond back unless there are questions as to the submittals. The New Jersey DEP has a service that's called the data manager, the data miner, and when we check on that service, it shows that the case has been closed. In other words, the DEP has accepted the document as submitted without further questions.
And can they ever refer back to that document and have questions in the future?
Typically, once they've looked at them and they've accepted them, they get filed and become part of the record. Now, there may be instances where there is a reopener. For example, something new gets discovered or new activity. But typically, once the department has completed its review and put it away, it's been put away.
Yeah, there is a 3-year period of time that the regulatory agency can, reopen a case.
Yeah. Well, typically, it's not so much an automatic reopener, but rather than they give themselves 3 years to review it, depends on their caseload and so forth.
And that's part of the LSRP program, was to have professionals actually handle DEP's workload.
Well, we're not inevitably handling their workload as much as we're saying, we're no different. Well, we're not saying, but the idea is that a licensed remediation professional is no different than a licensed doctor or a licensed engineer who says, I've been to school for 15 years, I've been doing this for 30 years. When I say that I've looked at it and I've made these conclusions, I know what I'm talking about, and I take the responsibility of making the statement, fully understanding what it is that I'm certifying. The DEP still, and if you talk to anyone at the DEP, will tell you that the DEP still maintains the right and the responsibility for review and oversight and to represent the interests of the state.
Correct. Is there any concerns with the solid waste that's on part of the site?
This is a fairly common occurrence at industrial properties in New Jersey, and both the current industrial site yes, thank you. Industrial Site Recovery Act, ISRA, and the predecessor, ECRA, recognize the fact, and they have the concept of the industrial establishment, and basically limits the application of the relevant rules and regulations to what is the proper industrial operation and not to anything else that was not related to that. In a broader sense, there have been wells that have been installed at the site around the former landfill, and the data that had been collected did not show impacts and indications of migration. So even though the presence of the former landfill is not a regulatory trigger from just a detailed technical standpoint, it does not appear that that landfill would be presenting a potential concern for the property.
Well, sometimes with some landfills you have methane gas problems. Where there any tests done to see if there's any methane coming out of this landfill? Because you're talking about unrestricted use for the entire property. If we got a methane problem there, I can't see that being unrestricted use.
The subdivision would be removing that part of the property from the from future use, and under the provisions of ISRA, it is recognized that the landfill is not part of the industrial establishment. Therefore, it is not being evaluated as part of the industrial establishment.
So the landfill hasn't been, so there's no free unrestricted use of the area adjacent to the landfill. You're talking about the bigger lot then? Because the landfill's in the smaller lot.
Correct.
Correct.
So you're saying the free, use.
The unrestricted use is for the 200-acre parcel.
Okay, so there could be still problems with the smaller parcel then?
Well, wait a minute, let's get our terminology correct. And I can mark this, the original ECRA, before ISRA, there was ECRA. That was the predecessor statute. Glengarry bought the property from New Jersey Shale. That was an ECRA trigger. That was the first ECRA trigger. At that point, the LSRP process, had not been adopted. So DEP actually oversaw the remediation at that time. And so that was triggered in 1988, and they issued what was called then a negative declaration, and that's dated July 17th, 1990. And what they stated, the same thing, in other words, the way it was handled by the LSRP was consistent with this. In fact, I think Mr. Slager is the...
Yes.
Yeah, he pointed that out in his report, that it was handled in a manner consistent with the way the DEP did in 1990. Also in this in the negative declaration, Mr. Toscos mentioned that this landfill was closed. It was part of the, Hillsborough owned the adjacent property, and a portion of it, of this property, was used for the landfill. But it was the Hillsborough landfill adjacent to it. They referred to it in the negative declaration as the closed Hillsborough municipal landfill. They asked for groundwater monitoring, the DEP, back in the 80s, and at this point, the township conveyed the adjacent property to PSE&G. So the DEP came and ordered PSE&G and New Jersey Shale to monitor the groundwater. And as Mr. Toscos indicated, the levels of the contaminants did not require any further remediation. And as part of the negative declaration, the July 17th, 1990 declaration, it says that New Jersey Shale Brick Manufacturing shall seal all monitoring wells installed for compliance with ECRA and submit well abandonment forms, et cetera, et cetera. And as a please be advised that this case is being referred to the Division of Water Resources, Bureau of Water Allocation, et cetera. So the groundwater was reviewed prior to the ECRA trigger, but sort of more or less brought to closure with this negative declaration in 1990. Then Glengarry, this was to cover their purchase of New Jersey Shale. Another trigger, several different ways you can trigger ISRA. One is a change of ownership. So that was the original 1988 trigger. In 2008, Glengarry ceased operations. And a cessation of operations is also a trigger under ISRA. So basically re-triggered the same act. And that's what brought these gentlemen on board to handle all the necessary filings. So there may be, and the industrial establishment was defined as the area in the site that was not where the landfill was. Right. Again, similar to the way it was done in 1990. Now, in connection with that remediation, there are no restrictions, legal restrictions, on the use. As to the portion that was the former municipal landfill, there are no restrictions, legal restrictions, put it that way. There are no legal restrictions. Whether there are practical restrictions is a different question, and obviously there are. I mean, it has no load-bearing capacity. What you can do with it is probably a very passive type use. For example, PSE&G, that property next to it is what was the larger part of the landfill, the municipal landfill. It's, it just has utility structures on it, and so it's that kind of use. What can go on the smaller parcel here? Perhaps a solar farm, some sort of passive use, maybe preserved as green space. But again, there are practical limitations, I will call them, but not legal restrictions. So I hope that answers.
So also, I think we need to.
You can't testify.
No, I'm just explaining that. I mean, first of all, Mr. Poston, would you, anything I just said, would you just elaborate on that? And I apologize to you, but
Yeah, I mean, again, the way the statute and the rule works under this ISRA and ECRA program is for what they call, it's a defined term, the industrial establishment. The industrial establishment is the area that the operations of the facility occurred on. So in this case, it's the Glengarry's operations, which did not include the area of the former landfill. So in terms of the work that the LSRP completes, looks at potential areas that could be contaminated, samples the soil to determine whether you actually exceed any contamination or not. I believe in this case, Ted sampled the roadway.
Well, we sampled any number of areas of concern. There's a fairly well-defined and rigorous process about how you do a number of inspections and record checks and so on, and decide what might be a target that you got to check out, and then it's fairly well defined in regulation how you proceed from there, and then you end up at the final report where you say, what areas did you identify, how did you check them, what was the outcome, did they need to be remediated, how you remediated them. So it wasn't, just that one, but it was any number of areas that we identified. Because I realize that probably most of you, I'm not going to say you've never seen an RAO, but you don't see them as often as we do. The presence of the landfill is clearly identified in the RAO, okay? One of the things that the law and regulation that stems from it has tried to do was impart an incredible amount of transparency in the process. So there is, in fact, a paragraph in there that identifies that and explains how that it was not investigated because it is not part of the industrial establishment, and explains that it was previously known to the NJDEP. And and under law and regulation, we are supposed to provide copies to the municipality, and copies of the RAO have in fact been transmitted to the office of the mayor and the clerk at that time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
From my edification, Mr. Marmora, and I'll put this in quotes, testified, close quote, that there are various trigger points for either what was Ekron or what is now ISRA. If Glengarry were to sell this property, would that be another trigger for another set of reports?
Not at this point, because it's no longer an industrial establishment.
You speak into the mic, please.
At this point, it's no longer an industrial establishment.
I mean, the way that I understand it is ECRA doesn't apply it to the landfill because it's not part of that investigation. So, I mean, we're talking about two separate entities here. We're talking about your investigation, ECRA and ISRA, throughout the course of time, which we see, or the monitoring wells part of the ECRA, which also is not part of the landfill.
No, the monitoring wells, the monitoring wells were that was requested by the DEP prior to the ISRA trigger. That goes back to the mid-'80s.
To monitor what?
Groundwater.
For the industrial site or the landfill?
There was a time when the DEP believed that what is called NJIPDIS rules, New Jersey New Jersey Pollution Discharge Elimination System, applies to former landfills, and at that time it required that wells be installed around the former landfill. The courts later struck down the DEP's interpretation of that regulation, so the requirement was automatically rescinded, but in the meantime wells had been installed and had been sampled at least once, and that had been memorialized in reports that had been submitted by professionals before us.
Where is that data?
We submitted that.
To who?
We were asked to, it was submitted as part of the initial submission for ISRA back in 1988. It was part of the SES. But the Environmental Commission here also asked for that data, and that was submitted to the town. It was, the co-permittees were New Jersey Shale and PSE&G on the groundwater wells. And so all those samples were really the whole landfill. And that was all submitted, to the DEP back then, but the results were also submitted to the township about a year ago, I believe.
The only thing, I just don't remember, did the Environmental Commission did you get a response, or did they review the data?
I don't know if they reviewed the data, but...
I don't either, and I'm on the Environmental Commission.
What's that?
I'm on the Environmental Commission, I don't remember.
I mean, I know that it was submitted. We were asked to submit it, and we did submit it. We did submit the results.
So, I mean, in your professional opinion as a geologist, what would be your concerns about a landfill and the geology of the landfill and the, potential concerns that you would have as a professional, as a geologist? I mean, if you were sitting in my seat, what would your concerns be?
I guess the fairest way to respond to your answer is it depends at what you're looking at. As I understand, let me elaborate. Maybe it'll become clear. As I understand from having talked with the operators, for example, this area was created originally by mining, but you don't mine for shale, for making brick below a certain level, and that would be the local water level. So you have some type of a filling operation that is occurring above groundwater. When I inspected the site, the landfill area is covered, it's capped, it's generally some type of a red soil material, which in this in this part of New Jersey generally signifies silty clay, low permeability material. So just as a conceptual exercise, looking at this, let's say leachate generation is probably not a large concern because just at face value, it appears to be a dry mound. It is well vegetated. There is mature trees on it. There's but I'm not a botanist, so excuse my characterization, but there's tall grasses under these trees, so there's a fairly well developed vegetated cover on it, which generally means that what is there has been naturally anchored, so it's probably not going to go anywhere. So it is not such a, from a just a first blush, it's not an imminent concern. I mean, we've seen, in my 30 years, I've seen operations where you go out and you see this big, mountain of drums, and it stinks, and there's stuff oozing off the site. That's not it. So it's, as I said, as a first blush, just observing what can be observed, it has the appearances of something that is not an imminent threat.
I mean, in my opinion, it would just be reasonable for somebody to review that data. I don't know if Mr. White has seen it. Again, it's been.
I have it here. I think I may have it here.
Okay, it's been a long time since I know we've been working on the application, so I don't remember every detail. I know we've gone through certain, a lot of iterations. I certainly feel more comfortable if some technical review from Hillsborough looked at that. And I guess I always just wonder in my mind, why do we need a line if, everything's
May I?
okay?
Yes.
That's always my million-dollar question I have.
Why would you need to distinguish it if it's okay?
Well,
in layman's terms.
I know by law you can apply for it.
the applicant has the right to request a subdivision of its property.
Right.
I don't think this applicant has been anything but above board to this board for now 2+ years as to, I think, the general reason why it chose to subdivide the property. And that basically is there is a, and I put this in quotes, a cleaner, close quote, portion of the property than there is. One of the reasons, for those of you who were not on the board when this application first came to the board, was the way in which it was presented to the board, and it was basically offered up as, in my words, John will correct me, I'm sure, that we'll keep the clean piece, and you, literally, it was offered to the township, can have the, my quotes, dirty piece, which got those board members who are still here and those board members who are no longer with us, either literally or figuratively in township, absolutely crazed. It then required a new application, a new applicant's attorney, and a whole host of other issues that got us to where we are today. There is nothing before you that indicates that the line is not being drawn in an inappropriate manner in accordance with the municipal land use law. When and if Glengarry gets out of the land business, and when and if the township ever rezones this other than mining, which, contrary to Mr. Marmora's comments at the beginning, the township is under no obligation to change the zoning ever from what it currently is to anything other than what it currently is. So anyone who buys the property, I'm assuming, will be told that they are buying a property that's currently zoned mining, with no guarantee that will ever be developed anything other than mining. If the committee were at some point to change the zoning after recommendation from this board, and if there was an application before you all, and if the applicant came in and sought to develop either or both sides of the property, at that point, this board would be well within its jurisdiction to make the applicant, my words again, as crazy as you want to make them related to the environmental provisions to ensure that whatever is being built on the site is environmentally safe for whoever plans on occupying the site. But I understand everybody's concern. And John, unfortunately, and David and John and I, so the board is aware, have had multiple conversations prior to these applications, and we have discussed the issue of we're getting the cart, my words, getting the cart before the horse. This is simply a subdivision line. If they chose to draw the line down the middle of the property and kept part of X here and part of Y there, and they had a reason to do it, they can do it. What happens after that with whatever the line is done will be a whole nother problem for a whole nother group of people, whether it's the applicant or a subsequent owner. So I'm not trying to cut the board off. I'm merely pointing out to the members of the board that what you have before you tonight and what you have had before you since day one has been a subdivision line. You want to turn the subdivision line down, you could do so. And obviously, the applicant will take the appropriate measures it wishes to do regarding such. But the only thing before you, folks, is a subdivision line of a property zoned mining.
Yeah, but all due respect, I mean, I don't think my question was answered in an appropriate way from the geologist who's talking about he didn't see any drums piled up, but he doesn't know the geology and he didn't know the results of the data for the wells, and Mr. White hasn't had a chance to review that data. I would feel a lot more comfortable if our professional engineer had an opportunity to review that data and can tell me, you know, hey, I reviewed it and this is what I think. So that's, you know, that's my view.
And I'm not trying, Neil, to prevent you or the board from making that request of Bill or for conditioning any decision based on that with Bill. I'm just pointing out a more generic legal issue.
The application.
I think we all get it.
Well, the application, you know,
But I want the record.
Well, we have to remember that the application is for a subdivision, not use, not how it's going to be used, not the condition of the property, not the LSROP, how it was done. Right? Is as Erica said, it's strictly just asking to put a line on a map. All the questions that we're asking or concerns that we have will become very apparent at the next phase. And that's if and when this property would ever be developed. So, buyer beware, so to speak. If they sold this, they knew that this be coming in front of this board would be really where the rubber meets the road.
However, Mr. Chairman, if the board wished to condition any decision, now, let me ask a question. What's the date of decision on this?
I will give you an extension if that's.
I'm not asking, I'm just.
Asking
I
for
believe
a
that it's September the 30th. If the board wishes to condition any decision on Mr. White's review, as Mr. Julian has indicated, of the materials that we've been provided, that's well within the board's right to do. I don't want anyone to think that I'm somehow trying to.
No, I agree.
Mostly my comments from Mr. Wagner and Mr. Julian. But then, if there's anything else you all want, either Bill or anyone else to take a look at, the time I suspect is now.
No, I certainly, let me just back up and comment on what, and I agree wholeheartedly with everything Mr. Bernstein said. The intention of Glengarry, we were a neighbor in this town for many, many years. Our intention is not to fight with the township. Our intention has all along been to work with you.
Microphone,
Mr.
please.
Bernstein, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Bernstein is right. I was not here at the hearing, 3 years ago. I know it got off on a wrong foot. And the reason why is I'm not going to name names, but one of the potential uses of this site would be a passive use such as dog walking park, ball fields, whatever, and a prior employee of the township suggested that to Glengarry as part of the application. So unfortunately, I think that suggestion was made kind of off the cuff, but without speaking to decision makers. So then that was sort of taken and run with. And so when Glengarry came before this board and said, yeah, then we can give this to the township, the understanding was that that was something the township had an interest in. The township, obviously we found the township has no interest in that, and that's fine. How and when if this property could be developed remains to be seen. And Mr. Bernstein's right, the township is under no obligation to rezone the property, can remain mining. My assumption is that in which case, any development of the other tract would go to the zoning board for use variance. My assumption is substantial developments or developments of substantial tracts like this that you want before the planning board, not being approved by way of use variance at the zoning board, which is why I assumed you would change the zoning at some point to something that you want to see.
I'm sorry, I just have to jump in because just keep going around the circle on what it's zoned for. It's zoned mining. However, as I've pointed out several times, the default zone is general industrial. Anybody could come in here today with an application to develop it as any number of industrial uses that we find in the GI zone. No use variance is required. So to characterize this property as, well, you can only mine on it, so no one's going to do anything, that's totally incorrect.
Right, okay.
Consider this it's another our GI, general industrial zone, which is up on Valley where the asphalt plant is, Hercules. This is a heavy industrial district. It's not just to dig holes in the ground. So let's everybody keep that clear.
Yeah, no,
we don't have,
correct.
Eric's absolutely right. We're under no obligation to rezone it. It's zoned for very intense use as it is, for industrial purposes. So let's just keep the record clear on
that's correct. And I did misspeak on that. You are. My assumption was that's not what.
Forget mine. Hold it in general industrial zone.
General industrial, and we do meet all the bulk criteria for the general industrial. It's still a variance-free application.
Okay.
But again, the goal of Glengarry is to continue being a good neighbor in this town, and we have obviously a substantial tract that can be developed for whatever, general industrial or some other use if the township wanted to rezone it. Again, that's entirely the township's discretion, not Glengarry's. But you have this one piece of it that was formerly part of the municipal landfill that came over from the PSE&G side, what is now PSE&G's property. And that's it's difficult to deal with. But this is, in our view, the best way to deal with it is to separate it, let the other piece go and for development of some sort, And what can happen on the remaining tract is obviously going to be a much less intensive use unless somebody wants to dig up the land, but I don't think anybody is thinking along those lines. Certainly PSE&G's not, I mean, not that I've talked to them, we haven't had no discussions with PSE&G, but since they're just using it for utility structures, I doubt there's any appetite to start digging in the ground there.
So I would say a reasonable approach would be is that we have the data, let's review the data, let's pull the curtain back, let's see what we have, and then we know what we have or don't have.
Okay.
I understand the whole ECRA, ISRA, you know, I don't have a problem with that, but I do have a problem with not knowing or not evaluating data that we have here right now. Not for the next applicant, but we have it now. So let's let Mr. White review it.
I don't have a problem with that.
Mr. White, on your report that you filed, there's a couple that are specific to the lines themselves. One I think was in your, whether things are being filed by deed or map, and any of those things that can be addressed now that we all should go with that?
It's fine. They're going to file by deed more than likely, I assume.
I would assume probably deed.
Minors, you
Okay.
don't typically, I just want to get it clarified for the record.
Okay. Anything else that's pertained to the
I think everything else has been addressed at this point.
Okay. All right, so we have a request, if I may just go to the point here of what's the board's pleasure here? Do you want to take a vote on what's been applied? Do you want to ask for some time for Mr. White to review what we have? What's the?
I don't know what's reasonable. I mean, how long, you have to ask Mr. White how long it would take him to review it, right?
See, it's a holiday weekend, I guess we have it done by tomorrow. I'm just looking at the report, I can tell you the data is from 1988.
Right.
I know. Okay. How relevant it is to today?
Marginal.
Don't know.
Would the applicant be willing to carry this to the October 6th? The October 6th meeting, which is the first Thursday next month? Would that be enough time?
That's fine. I just want to get clarification. I found the document I had. I want to make sure it's a document that was referred to in testimony. If I could just approach witness.
Yeah, we should probably mark them because we've referred to a couple things, so maybe we should.
While Mr. White is approaching, Mr. Mamora, that would require another extension from your client to the 31st of October.
That's right.
Is that acceptable to the board?
Yes.
I can't, I'm looking at
Okay.
you, Bob, because I
We
can't
need,
see
we
you
need a
go
motion
behind
to
me.
accept the extension to.
Should we just, can we just mark?
We gonna mark that submission?
Or did
It's
you-
already in, it's,
I
sorry.
can't take it out of here to look at it if you mark it.
I have another copy that I could give you.
I just want, I just, we're
Why don't we, can you provide us?
Yeah.
Can you provide the board's engineer with a copy of the document before we leave tonight?
I have it.
Yes.
No.
Yes,
their
I have
copy, so we
another
can
copy.
So we can mark it.
Thank you. Okay.
In fact, if you have an extra copy, sir, now?
Yeah, we have it.
Mark
We'll give
Why
you
don't we
that.
mark it?
Mark
You
that
can-
We
you can
referred
take
to-
yours.
We referred to
I'm not giving it up.
You can give yours up, and then you can not have somebody say, how did you take the document out of here?
So
I would like to mark two documents just because we referred them tonight. One is the July 17, 1990 negative declaration issued by the State of New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection.
Okay.
Which would be A3. And then A4, Bill, you want to just read the heading of that? Or?
A4 be Environmental Cleanup Responsibility Act, initial notice, site evaluation submission. And it is dated March 16th, 1988. Prepared by RPS.
That March or May?
I'm sorry, May. May 16th, 1988. And it's prepared by, oh, there it is. Raritan Environmental Science, Inc.
Eric, is it reasonable also, the Environmental Commission will meet at least once or twice before that time? When we meet, I want to